Alicia Barnes. I'm the Academic Development Manager for Milady, and I'm going to spend the next 45 minutes to an hour with you guys talking about effective lecture techniques. You know, without a doubt, lecture is a major part of our educational program. It has been the traditional standard teaching method for most classrooms for as long as any of us can remember. Now, in spite of its widespread use, the effectiveness of lecture as a teaching method has been widely debated. You know, is it the most effective for our type of student, or is it not effective? So that's kind of what we want to look at today and see how can we make our lectures more engaging to our students so that they have better retention and can learn the material quicker, faster, if you will. I'm sure that all of us have had the experience where we sat in a classroom in a lecture and listened to an instructor who stood up there and either read from their textbook or read from a lesson plan and kind of talked to you in a really monotone voice like this, and it was kind of like the Charlie Brown commercials, or not commercials, but the Charlie Brown show, the instructors on that. Wah, 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 wah. We've all stood in that classroom, and more than likely we found ourselves not paying attention, totally disengaged, drift. We certainly weren't learning in the classroom, and we certainly were not optimize our lecture presentation, how to plan and prepare for and even present a lecture so that all of our students can learn effectively. We're going to talk about how to effectively combine lecture with other teaching methodologies to best meet the needs of all of our students. So today's lecture, I think the term lecture is probably not the best term for us anymore, especially traditional lecture. Traditional lecture was all about me, the instructor, standing in front of a classroom. I'm in charge. Everybody be quiet and listen to everything I have to say. And we certainly know with today's students that that does not work so well anymore. Today's lecture, I think the word interactive lecture is actually a much more effective technique for today's students. An interactive lecture takes it away from being teacher-centered, what we've had in the past, and making it very much student-centered. So let's look at our objectives for today's webinar. First of all, we want to identify the purpose of lecture in the classroom. We're going to know how to effectively plan for a lecture, identify effective lecture techniques, and look at actually how to expand the lecture and again, make it more engaging so the student can retain more. Lectures are appropriate for a variety of teaching purposes. It's important that we as educators use lecture for an appropriate, got to get away from the idea that, well, we've always done it, so we have to do it. Yeah, we have to have lecture to disclose the information to our students, but we need to get away from how we've traditionally delivered lecture and look at what other functions does it serve and how can we make it more effective in our classrooms. First of all, the purpose of a lecture is it helps the student organize information. It helps them benefit from understanding the organization of the information relative to the course objectives. By knowing how and when the information is going to be used in their life, students are better able to understand and make sense of the course content. So we want to help them understand the relationship of the information to the goals of the course. Always relate the lecture to the bigger picture for them. Make sure that the lecture is always tying into why we're doing this, because a lot of times students struggle with why they have to learn chemistry or why they have to learn anatomy and physiology. So the purpose of the lecture is to help organize that content into the bigger purpose of the entire program and not just the class itself. The purpose of the lecture is to summarize large amounts of material in a very short period of time. We can take a lot of content from the textbook, and we have to get to the meat of the material, if you will, so that students are grasping the key points. And so we can take large amounts of content and really dive into the critical key components of that chapter of the lesson plan. It makes the information applicable. In some cases, the printed information available in the resource material is very general, and some students require a specific treatment of the information, meaning lecture can be more focused to meet the specific needs of the students. So again, you're taking the course content in the textbook and really being able to pull out we're delivering on all the content, but you're really being able to hit home what the key points are. What are the major concepts in this chapter to help the students fine-tune that information? Lecture, believe it or not, can be used to motivate students, and I know that that'll make some of us laugh right there because that's probably one of their least favorite parts of school. But we can really start learning how to, by making our classrooms more hands-on and discovery-oriented, is going to help motivate the student to action, which is what a purpose of a lecture is to get them to acknowledge what they know, what they don't know, and how to improve upon that and create an action plan to improve who they are. Remember that our enthusiasm as educators in the classroom is contagious, and so we want to make sure that we stand up there and we're so motivated and excited about a topic that they will be drawn to that motivation as well. It's very impossible for a student to get motivated about a subject that we as the educator is not quite excited about, okay? And I know sometimes it's hard for some of us to get excited about nail diseases or chemistry or skin diseases, but we do have to get excited and get engaged with that material so that the students will follow suit. Think of it this way. Think about your classes on your fun subjects like hair color or maybe something within the facial course that is really engaging to the student, and how dynamic those classes are because there's so much interaction. And then when we get to more of the sciences classes, people tend to want to sleep through them because it's not quite as fun and engaging. Think about who you're being with that. Think about how you're delivering the material in one because you're excited about it versus the other one because maybe we're not as comfortable with it. So find ways to motivate yourself first. Another purpose to the lecture is so that we can explore concepts and applications. This is basically, once the student has learned basic concepts, the lecture could then go in and examine the application. That's what we really excel at in our industry, is that we deliver the concept and then we move into the hands-on application. And the lecture sets the pace for that. But we also want to get a little bit further than just the application, and we really want to use the lecture as a method for them exploring their critical thinking skills. And I know that today's students likes to just be handed information sometimes, and so finding creative ways through group discussions and activities to get them engaged in critical thinking and thinking outside of the box through follow-up discussions of our lecture and problem-solving skills, that's going to go a long way in making our lectures more dynamic as well. Lecture allows us to model behaviors and processes. Basically, what I'm talking about here is that it can provide us with those methods for problem-solving techniques and a way to develop those decision-making strategies. These concepts are very difficult to explain in a textbook. It's very difficult to explain the concept of problem-solving or decision-making in a textbook with a subject. So in the lecture, you can bring that to life, and it's much easier to explain it in person. So these are some of the purposes for our lecture. It's also a great opportunity for us to assess our students' progress, which is critical. We want to assess where they are. To me, assessing the students' progress is really a report card not on them, but on how well we are delivering our classes. So if none of our students are getting the material, perhaps we need to quit looking at why they're not getting it and start looking at how we are delivering it. And it's more of a way to assess us and our effectiveness by assessing the students' progress in lecture. Now, there are three basic concepts in planning a lecture. On the slide you see, it says an introduction, a body, and a conclusion. If you've ever been in any of our classes before, you've probably heard me say this, but the basic concept of teaching is, first of all, you're going to tell them what you're going to tell them, then you tell them, and then you tell them what you told them, okay? So you start with an opening, a powerful introduction, then you move into the body, and then you follow up with a review and a conclusion. So in the introduction, you want to establish a positive tone for the remainder of the lecture. This is where you're preparing the students to let them know what's coming up for the day. Now, depending on the length of your class will change the time that you spend on the introduction. If you're in a much longer class, you can spend more time on the introduction getting them engaged to the subject. If you're only in a 50-minute class, you're only going to spend probably 3 to 5 minutes on this concept of getting them engaged into it. This is an opportunity to get them to share their experiences with the subject matter, to draw on their conclusions and their expertise that they bring in. We want to get their questions. What are they curious about? This is where we identify the objectives for the class, and we tie in the learning motivation. Those of you who are using our lesson plans know that every lesson plan begins with a learning motivation. This is the very first thing we want to share with the students to get them excited about paying attention. This is where we build relevancy. This is where we build enrollment. We want to build those two things into our presentation so that they understand the relevancy. They can make the connection that says, okay, this is interesting, I'm willing to pay attention. And then you enroll them into the conversation through that learning motivation by saying, this is what we're going to do. Here's the reason we're going to do it. And then they become enrolled. They recognize, hey, okay, this is interesting, and now I'm willing to pay attention and take action on what you're talking about. Basically, this whole piece could be summarized in the WIIFM. What's in it for me? Every class we begin, lecture-wise, we need to start with a what's in it for me, and let them know what's going to come out of it, okay? From there, we move into the body. That's where we get to the bulk of our classroom. This is the lecture of your content. You deliver it in a spoken format. It needs to be, this is where we're going to spend a lot of our time. This is where you follow your lesson plan. Yeah, I know that some of us believe, I don't want to use the school's lesson plans. I want to come up with my own because I want to make it my own. And what I want to tell you is, yes, use your school's lesson plans. Follow those lesson plans because it's so critical that every student gets the same content no matter which instructor is teaching them. That's the body of your lesson plan, the lesson plan that you're dealing with, the content. Now, you make it your own by adding your own analogies, your own stories, your own experiences, bringing those things into the classroom. So within the body, you make it your own by bringing you into that class. You also bring in discussion activities. You bring in activities out of the textbook. You bring in other information. Maybe you saw an article on a website or in a magazine that really relates to that class. You bring that in. That is how you make lecture engaging, is by bringing in all these other ideas and getting them involved. Now, with that, you have to plan ahead. You can't just walk into a classroom and just start reading from a lesson plan. You have to plan ahead, know what content is going to be covered that day, and what activities you want to do. You've got so many activities at your fingertips that you can use between the textbook that has activities built into it. There are the learning reinforcement activities at the end of every lesson plan. Within the lesson plan itself, there are a variety of activities. You've got different tools like the study guide, the Essential Companion that has great activities. The situational problems text review book has some. So there's a lot of tools out there that will help you come up with ways to juice up the body of your presentation. And then at the end of the class, we come to the conclusion. Now, from my experience, from my time in the schools, I feel that this is always my weakest area, and I think what would happen is I'd be so engaged in my content that I knew that the clients were building up in the clinic out there and that they were waiting, and I needed to get the students out and, okay, let me finish this one thought and go, and I always failed to summarize my class. And you need to always make sure, no matter what you've got going on, that you always plan into your class enough time to summarize what you just talked about. Remember, you're going to tell them what you're going to tell them, and then tell them what you told them. You want to follow up with some sort of dynamic closing in the class, a powerful closing, to remind them, here's what we covered today, and use some sort of review, whether it's a Q&A or discussion questions. One of the ones I like to do these days is to actually have the student find a partner, get them to find a partner and share what you got out of today, what stood out for you. Okay, so I know that we've very traditionally done this a certain way. Be creative in this process and come up with other ways to review the material. Okay, when we're planning for a lecture, we need to make sure that we are planning it carefully so that we will capture and hold the interest of our students, that we will be able to incorporate effective techniques so that we are keeping their attention. I want you to keep in mind that these kids have been raised with entertainment. Their parents didn't even take them to Walmart for the 10-minute drive to Walmart without putting a DVD in the back seat of the car. These kids have been entertained from birth, and now all of a sudden we come to class in our schools and we just lecture to them. And so we've got to find ways to make it very creative and interactive with them. There's a number of ways that we can do that to help this out. First of all, remember what the primary goal is. The primary goal of the lecture is to always help the student learn the information and apply it to their chosen career. Now, with that, I want to tell you, it means teaching them more than what is state board preparation, okay? Yeah, don't misunderstand me. State board is critical. I recognize without passing state board, they can't get their license. I get that. But we want to teach beyond state board. We want to take that content and relate it to their future, okay? So it is to help them learn, but to help them learn the material in relationship to what it's going to be like for them in the salon, okay? Now, the lecture should incorporate and expand upon their experiences, their prior knowledges, their attitudes, their assumption. They all, as adult learners, bring these various things into the class, so we want to use concept connectors in our classrooms in order to relate it to their experiences. You want to build relevancy in your classroom by telling stories from your background that gets the student ready to say, hey, I'm ready to do this, I'm ready to take action. The lecture should be used to teach students to think critically, to see relationships between concepts, to learn to discover and analyze new information. So often we just give them all the answers, and our lecture should become ways of asking them a question that makes them think. And I know I get so excited when I'm talking that I just want to give everybody the answers. We want to make sure that we give them time to formulate a response, to come up with an idea. I remember when I was in college, I had a professor who you would ask him a question, and he would ask you a question back. And it used to make me crazy as a student, as you can imagine, but what I recognized that he did is he didn't just give me the answers, he made me think to come up with the answers. And that was a valuable lesson for me, that I really learned to process information and come up with my own conclusions. And then he was there to guide me and say, yeah, that's exactly right, or no, that's a little bit off, what about this? And guide them to the right conclusion, but getting them to think about those conclusions on their own. A lecture is also honestly about repetition, because repetition is one of the greatest forms of learning. So it's critical that we understand that it is okay to review information. It is okay to repeat some information. Recognize that a student is not going to retain it the first time we tell them, okay? That sometimes we have to tell them multiple times, and that's really what is going to help set those key points in their long-term memory, all right? To have some effective lecture techniques, I'm sorry, let me get the slide changed to the next one there. What we want to do, there's a couple of things that we can do. First of all, we need to practice and fine-tune our presentation skills, our techniques. We need to consider who we are. Practice different techniques until they become very natural. Assess your skills by videotaping yourself. Everybody has cameras these days. You can get a flip cam, no problem, and have one of your colleagues videotape you in a presentation and then review it. And I know that's really hard to look at. I have the same challenge. I don't like to see myself on tape, but when I do that, I can see a lot of the bad habits that I have. I can see some of the mannerisms I have. So fine-tune your teaching skills, your presentation ability, and then create a plan of action on how to improve your ability to stand in front of an audience and share your ideas. The second bullet there, I know we all know this, but it's always worth reminding us that we have to look and act the part. The way you present yourself on a regular basis is every bit as important as how you stand in front of a classroom and lecture. Every school has its own standards for dress, general standards for cleanliness, that type of thing. But as educators in the image industry, this is so critical that when we stand up, that we look the part. I know schools struggle a lot with dress codes with students, and I think it starts with us. Don't misunderstand me. I'm not sitting here saying that nobody out there on the call dresses professionally. I think you're all amazing and all dress extremely professionally with our students. But always remember that. Keep in mind that our professional behavior is as important as our physical presentation. We want to think about our tact, our integrity, our responsibility, our good judgment. Think about your body language. You know, we may say one thing, but then our body language, you know, with the eye rolling or the shoulder shrug, may say something else to a student. So all of those things tie together in our ability to deliver a dynamic presentation. I know that from my experience, one of the areas I would appear very confident in front of a classroom as I was going through my content. Where I struggled was when I would begin to open it up to them to ask questions, because I got a little bit nervous about what kind of questions they might ask me and whether or not I would know the answer. And so I know that my body language would change at that point, and you could tell that I was more uncomfortable. So as I fine-tuned those skills and I practiced that, I really began to focus on my body image and my ability to show the confidence throughout the presentation, regardless of whether or not I was feeling confident or not, because that goes a long way in my ability to stand there and present professionally. We want to tell our students, explain how the lecture is going to be organized. This is why we tell them in the beginning what the content is going to be about, what we're going to tell them. We want to address how we're going to do it so that they have the context on how they can follow through. It's important that we have a framework. Consider giving your students an outline, explaining how the class is going to go so that they can follow along. And it's okay to deviate from that outline sometimes, as long as we explain to the students that, hey, we're going to go down this little rabbit trail over here. We're going to go a little bit different direction than what we planned, and it will help them just stay aware of what's going on. The last bullet may have some of you freaking out when I say limit to 15 to 20 minutes. I can see the head shake, and I can hear the go, oh, yeah, that's right, we have a 2-hour class. How am I supposed to do that? Well, I'm not saying have a 20-minute class, and I'm not telling you to take a break every 20 minutes, okay? Let me explain that a little bit clearer for you. There's been a lot of research done on this that says the average adult learner can listen with understanding of the material for 90 minutes. That research continues by saying that the average adult listener can listen with retention of the material for only 20 minutes. And most people that you talk to in regards to this will tell you that the students need a change of pace every 8 minutes in order to retain and understand the material. And I can hear you, Alicia, we can't take a break every 8 minutes. You're absolutely right. You can't take a break every 8 minutes. You can't take a break every 20 minutes. I get that. What this is talking about is we've got to have a change of pace in our classroom every 8 minutes or so. A change of pace meaning going from a lecture to a demonstration to an activity to a question and answer to me just asking them as a group a question. It includes me moving around the classroom. It would include me changing my voice a little bit. Maybe start talking a little bit softer, or maybe I get louder all of a sudden, and that is going to change the pace in my classroom. It's going to vary the stimuli, and that's what we're talking about. So you need to plan those kind of things out, where every 15 to 20 minutes you're incorporating maybe not a full-blown activity. Again, I know those sometimes get time-consuming, but to have them turn to a partner and share what they got out of the last 15 minutes, or share with a partner the answer to this question, or just exchange a couple of questions about the material you just covered. That's what we're talking about. Find a way to change the pace, vary the stimuli every 15 or 20 minutes in order to keep the students' interest alert and help them retain the content we are talking about. When we are creating our lecture, we want to limit it to 3 or 4 main points. Now, again, I get that sometimes we're covering a whole chapter like color in a 2 or 3 hour class, and there's just no way to stretch it out because of the time constraints we have in our curriculum. So I think what this is talking about is to, again, take those key points and do mini classes, if you will, almost kind of introduce that main point, talk about that main point, and then do a quick summary of that point. Not close the entire class, but summarize that concept. Then go into the next one and break up your content with more frequent reviews, more frequent Q&As. Instead of waiting to review and do a Q&A at the end of the entire chapter, do them in the middle of these various points. That will help break up the content a little bit better, again, to help the student stay more engaged. You break up that content with the Q&A or with stories, explanations, analogies, examples, visual aids, discussions. So again, it kind of relates back to the bullet I was just talking about, but break up those key points more frequently and don't always wait till the end of a chapter to review that content. The next bullet says begin and end with a summary. That's what I was talking about a couple of slides ago, to where you begin the content summarizing what you're going to talk about, and you end the class summarizing what you just talked about. Always bookend your lecture with this principle, and it helps keep the student focused on what it is they're learning. One thing it's important for us to understand is the difference between a presentation and a lecture. And I know a lot of times we just use those words interchangeably. I think I've actually used them interchangeably on this call. It's important to understand that a lecture is not a presentation, even though we often discuss it in terms of presentation skills. The goal of lecturing as part of teaching is to facilitate learning, while the goal of a presentation is to provide information regardless of whether or not somebody is learning. I've got a slide here that's going to show us the difference between the two, so let's just take a look at these and review them. Like I said, the lecture goal is to facilitate learning, while a presentation goal is to present the information. A lecture is about introduction and expanding and defining that. The introduction is very detailed. You're getting them a lot of information in that introduction, versus in a presentation, that introduction is very brief. Within the lecture, the body of the lecture is going to relate to the main points by making connections with previously learned concepts. It's going to incorporate activities. It's going to incorporate them reading from their textbook and their class, in prior study. Versus a presentation, this is a material, it stands alone. We're not relating it to anything else other than that class itself. A lecture involves effective questioning throughout the lecture. During a presentation, questions are typically answered at the end. In a lecture, students are expected to take notes. In a presentation, the audience is not necessarily expected to take notes. And for the lecture, students are evaluated on the material that is presented in a lecture, and in a presentation, you're not evaluated on it. So just take a quick inventory of your lecture plan and see where you are in some of these things that we've talked about. Okay? I want to keep going with some more effective tools that will help us out with our lecturing techniques. The first bullet, avoid reading from the lesson plan or textbook. Remember that an effective lecturer is able to present information in a spoken format without reading from your lesson plan or reading out of the textbook. It takes a skilled lecturer to do this. You need to speak in a very conversational tone. You establish a rapport with the class. You remain sensitive to the needs of the class. But I want you to keep in mind the term interactive lecture. Interactive lecture. It can't just be you reading from a book. And I'll be honest that it's not about the students reading from a book. Those are both very old school, traditional methods of teaching. And just reading to a student material that they can read at home on their own is not effective to them. So what we have to do is we've got to know our topic and know our material well enough to be able to speak about it rather than read it. Use your lesson plans for this. There's nothing wrong from teaching with a lesson plan. That's not what I'm saying. If you've ever seen me stand in front of an audience with a lesson plan, doing a class like this, I use a lesson plan. But it's a roadmap for me. It's to keep me on target. It's to keep me on task, to make sure that I don't go down some crazy trail, that I stay on topic and follow that lesson plan. It's important that you review your lesson plan before your class starts to refresh your material. One of the things I always do before I step into a classroom, I did it before this call. I sat down and read through my presentation to make sure it was very fresh in my mind. Be sure that you don't duplicate any material. That's one reason to read through it ahead of time, so you're not duplicating any material. I think it's also important as you're reviewing the material ahead of time to think about what stories you want to tell, what anecdotes you want to use, what humor, if you want to put any cartoons in it, any videos, any DVDs. I know we got a lot of great DVDs that will help enhance your classroom, but you have to look at all that ahead of time. So what I would challenge you to do is to go through your lesson plan, and as you read through it, think about all the tools that you have at your disposal, whether it's workbooks or study guides or DVDs or the game CD, whatever it is that you have. Make sure that you are looking at that stuff ahead of time and incorporating the right activities at the right space, and make notes in your lesson plan in able to do that. One other thing I would tell you to do is get really good at telling stories. Become a great storyteller. That is what brings a class to life, and that's how you're going to engage your students, by truly being able to tell a story dynamically. We want to be flexible in the classroom. It is important to stay focused enough that you cover the lesson objectives, yet you're flexible enough to make the lecture meaningful and address the student's needs. Sometimes a need might come up in the class that's a little bit different than the direction you were going to go with the lecture, and the more prepared you are, the more you can adjust to meet the needs of your students. Okay? Let the students see the real you. You need to strike a balance between conveying a sense of professionalism and being yourself. A lot of times, especially if you're a new educator, we tend to put on a very unnatural facade. We think we have to project a certain personality in the classroom that is different than who we normally are. And I will tell you from experience that be yourself. Many of you know my stepmother, Letha Barnes, and you've seen her in a classroom, and she is an amazing presenter. She is tremendous and just is my hero, my idol with this. And when I first started teaching, I tried to be her. And if you know her, she's very sophisticated, she's very professional, she's brilliant, she uses big words. And I tried to be that, and I'm just not that. I have a much different delivery style. I have a different sense of humor. And when I was able to quit trying to be someone else and I embraced who I was as a presenter, that's when I got really good at what I started doing. So let the students see who you are and be professional. You know, I'm not saying stand up there and be a joke teller all the time or this. You still got to review material. But you got to use your skill sets. You got to use your talents. Be yourself. Let your personality come through in that lecture. Don't try to be somebody else with that. The last bullet you see there says move around the classroom. Move around. Get out. If you got a desk in the classroom, first of all, squish it over to the corner and don't sit down behind it ever during a lecture presentation. Get rid of it, okay? If you have a podium, push it off to the side. Don't hide behind the podium. Get out, stand in front of your students with no barriers between you, okay? We don't sit down in our lecture. We certainly don't sit behind a desk. Don't hide behind a podium. Get out there. Now, I don't have a problem with having a podium because you got to have your notes there. You got to have your lesson plan laying there. What I'm saying is push it off to the side and get out there with your students, okay? Walk around the classroom, move through the audience. This is going to help with that varying the stimuli that I talked a little bit earlier. Your proximity to the student is going to help focus their attention and maintain their involvement. So move around it allows you to interact with them individually within the classroom. Now, the next step we want to talk about is to expand our lecture. All right? So we expand our lecture. Let your students know you are teaching to them as an individual. The student-instructor relationship is critical to the student learning process. You've got to learn to build positive relationships with your students by showing a genuine interest in their questions and their comments, and establish a warm yet professional classroom environment, and being available to the student before and after class, not just during lecture. Now, I am not telling you to fraternize with your students. That is not what I'm saying at all. You are not there to be their best friend. You're not there to know every detail about their life and for them to know every detail about yours. What we're talking about here is have a student-to-instructor relationship, that type of a relationship, not a best friend relationship, but know who they are. You know, a positive instructor-student relationship is going to offer benefits to you and the student by maintaining motivation for teaching and making the class a very pleasant experience. You can do this by, first of all, use your student's name when you're speaking to them. Call them by name. If you don't know everybody's name, learn them. Get name tags, whatever it takes to learn your students' names. Dale Carnegie says the sound of a person's name is the sweetest sound on earth to them. So learn those names. Incorporate elements of the student's background into your lectures. The more you know about your students, the more you can use personal examples that will relate to their knowledge and their background. Know what their emotional responses are to the material. This is where you got to pay attention to your students in class and watch them. Are they all drifting off? Then you don't have them present. You know, does one of them have a very confused look on their face? Help them get clear on that material. And again, the more prepared we are with our content, the more we're going to be able to adjust to meeting their needs. Okay? Ask for feedback from the students and then use it to build the positive classroom atmosphere. A piece of this is praise. Praise and recognition. Find ways to praise students for things outside of the classroom, not just what's going on in the theory classroom, but stuff that's happened in the school. Find ways to acknowledge and praise them for what they are doing. We want to offer a variety of ways to reinforce lecture outside of the classroom. This is basically what we're talking about here is whatever you're lecturing on that day, if you're not the student salon instructor as well, let your student salon instructors know what you taught that day, what you reviewed in class, so that as they're working the student salon or as you're out there working the student salon, they can continue with the conversation around that day's class to where any assignments that they're giving out can relate to that content. Always relate those two things together so that they are continuing to reinforce the lecture past class time, reinforcing it out in the student salon, getting the student involved with that. The next two bullets, it says pay attention to the struggling student and then pay attention to the most successful student in the class. We want to pay attention to that struggling student because there is a chance that this is the student we're going to lose. You know, the one who has excessive absences or chronic tardiness or consistently turning in assignments late or not turning them in at all. This is a student that is in danger of us losing, and we want to retain more students, so we really want to focus on them. And I'm not saying invest 100% of your time into the student. I'm saying be aware of them and talk to them individually about what we need to do to help them out, okay? The second one says complete opposite, pay attention to the most successful student in the class, because sometimes the brightest students in your class can also pose a retention problem, just as much as the struggling student, simply because that they're bored in the class or they're not engaged enough may cause them to decide, hey, I just don't want to do this. So we really want to pay attention to both. Now I'm going to throw you a curveball that's not even on the slide, And I'm going to say, don't forget the middle group either, okay? We really want to find ways to focus on all of our groups so that we're not losing any of them. You know, basically, I'm telling you to be very creative and find a ways to reach all your students in a classroom, no matter what you're doing, okay? Let me get to the next slide here. We can monitor our students' progress continually throughout our class. It's important that we get feedback from our students and be aware of how they are progressing. That is so critical. And this is talking a little bit more than just the test or asking them how they're doing. This is a couple of other ideas that you can assess your techniques. And I'm a big believer that it really doesn't matter how you feel you're doing in the classroom. It's when you start asking your students how they think you're doing, or if they're understanding the material. That's when it starts hitting home. So a couple of ideas here. The first one is called the muddiest point. What you do with this is have the student on a piece of paper write this at the end of the lecture. Have them write down what was 2 or 3 of the muddiest points, meaning what was the most challenging points? What was the toughest thing for you to understand in that day's lecture or maybe the week of lecture? And then this information that you get from them can be determined where the students are struggling. If you get, 75% of your students write down the same concept as what the muddiest point was, that will let you know that you need to go back in and clean that up a little bit and help them understand that a little bit better. Another great question to ask them is to ask them, what would make this clearer? Ask the student, what would make the concept clearer? The responses will vary from really great ideas to some sarcastic ideas to recommendations that you can't use. Sometimes you can. But if you will occasionally get some really great ideas on what would make the content clearer, and make sure you incorporate those in your next class. The fact that you asked your students is going to go a long way in their ability to relate to you. An add-on assessment is getting the student just to write down a couple of questions about a current topic that you're teaching them, and then you can address those questions during the class. Get them to write down, start your lecture off, and don't do this every time, do it occasionally, but ask them, what do you want to learn out of this subject? What is it that you hope to gain at the end of this chapter? And then write those on the board or write them down on a piece of paper, or maybe have a learning tree or something that they post them on and Post-it notes. And make sure you address some of those add-on materials so that we are addressing not only what we have to do for the state or for the accrediting agency, but also what the student wants as well. Encourage the students to email you questions. Maybe sometimes they're too shy to ask their question in front of everybody in the class. Give them your email address and have them email you questions. Great idea to start using technology like this in your schools with your students. Getting them to email you questions is going to be very beneficial for them as well. A teaching feedback form is basically a form that is going to solicit feedback on the student's view of your teaching. This is not something you want to do every day. This is something to do periodically just to assess where you are as an instructor. This is not a formal student survey. This is just something that you would do individually that says, hey, how are my teaching skills? Those of you who've been in any master educator class with us know at the end of every single class we pass around evaluation forms and we ask a couple of things. We ask you to evaluate the class itself. What did you like about the content? Did it work for you? What were the challenges? That type of thing. And then we have you evaluate the presenter. And from everything to the professional image, to their knowledge of the material, to their varying the stimuli in the classroom. We ask that in every single class. I think periodically it would be a great idea for you to go in and have your students evaluate you, because it's amazing what you can learn, okay? Now, when somebody puts something down, don't look at it that it's the end of the world, okay? It's just a way for you to get better. That's all it's doing. It's not because you're doing a bad job. It's an idea for you to get better. The 1-minute paper is basically at the end of the class, ask the student to write down a brief answer to a couple of questions. You could ask them, what is the main point you got out of today's class? Or what is the most important unanswered question you have for the day. You can have them write it down. One of the ways I prefer to do that is to actually have them stand up and find a partner and do a pair share where they share what was the one thing that stood out to you today, and share it with a partner. It's a great way to review your class and changes it up from those traditional Q&As that we've always done. And then, of course, we always have the formal student surveys, to where we do some sort of course evaluation. A lot of these are going to be handled by your administration, from your owners or your directors of education. They're going to do that. But take those serious. Take them serious and look at them, because you may read something from a student and you're like, I'm not that way at all. But keep in mind, if a student puts it down, it's their perception of you, and it may not be who you are. I absolutely agree with that. But if it is the student's perception, then it is their reality, and we have to learn how to address that so we can clean that up a little bit. So don't let those formal student surveys beat you up. Take them for what they are, suggestions on how you can improve, and then take it to heart and see if you can truly improve those areas. I want to leave you today with this quote. It says, "Lecture, a process in which the notes of the professor becomes the notes of the students without passing through the minds of either." Now, I had to read that a couple of times to understand it, but when I got it, I was like, wow. That is exactly what we don't want our lecture to become. I think that is probably a very traditional type of lecture, to where my notes go to the students' notes and neither one of us think about it. We certainly don't want that to be our lecture today. Our goal is to teach our students to use and apply the information they have obtained, rather than just repeating it to them. We want them to be able to look at the content in the book and us not just repeat it to them. We want to get them to think and to motivate them to action and to get them interested in acquiring new skills. And we have to be creative in our lectures in order to meet those goals for our students in our classroom. Above all, we want to make them interactive so that we will retain students. That is our ultimate goal, is student retention, and then to take those students that complete and get them licensed and get them placed in the industry. Never lose sight of what our ultimate purpose is. So a couple of things as we close this. I want to remind you guys that this content is pulled from our faculty development online classes. So if you want more details on this, you can actually sign up and take a full faculty development online class. The class today was pulled from a class called Techniques for Classroom Presentations. And this weekend is CEA, that's Cosmetology Educators of America. It's in Orlando this weekend. So if you are coming, I can't wait to see you there. We at Milady have multiple classes going on. I just put up a few of the classes that we are offering. We are doing a 3-hour Master Educator class that Patty Wanamaker and myself are teaching on Saturday. Sunday is our breakfast, and then we're going to have a class on technology with Gerard McAvey. I'm going to do a class on online education, and Suzanne Mulroy will be back doing a class on reversing assumption and inspiring innovative change. So if you're going to be at CEA, please join us in our classes. We would love to see you guys. Always like the feedback on what you think of these classes, if they're beneficial to you. And as always, please join us next week, or not next week, next month, for our next webinar, August 18th at 1 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Class will be Classroom Management. So thank you all for participating in today's call. Go out and make it a great week. Make your classes interactive, get your students engaged, motivated to learn, and hopefully you can apply some of these techniques that will help you out. Have a great day.